Hi sewing friends! Has this ever happened to you? I suddenly decided I needed to clone a swimsuit, learn to use a cover stitch, and make some pieces for the pool all in one weekend. I haven't made swimwear since 2018, but can remember the process. And then I haven't cloned any clothing in years either. I convinced my friend Alice to loan me her cover stitch machine, and I did this on the hottest weekend of the year. Here's how it went. This Bondi, Australia swimsuit was ready for throwing out, but I still love the silhouette. It has a really great stomach-flattering ruched panel, plus this twisted bodice detail with an internal shelf bust. If you've never cloned a garment before, this is a really fun technique for copying your clothes that you like the fit of. I've done it a few times, obviously over the last 15 years. There's a couple of methods. First, you can try the paper rub-off method. I first learned this approach in 2014. I had the book Pattern Making for a Perfect Fit, using the rub-off technique to recreate and redesign your favourite fashions by Stephanie Linceyum. But a more recent and excellent guide is the book Clone Your Clothes by Claire Louise Hardy. As you've guessed, you place your garment on plotting paper and trace the seams before converting it into a paper pattern. You can do this with or without cutting up your garment, depending on whether you still want to wear it. An alternative technique uses organza, which you pin around a 3D garment, which helps you get around curves much easier. You then trace the seam lines before transferring into a paper pattern. I use this on the excellent Genius course that's on Craftsy, taught by Kenneth D. King. I decided to use the paper plotting method and unpick several seams to make the tracing easier. I decided I wanted to keep the bust cups. I've separated the front so I can trace the long side panel. I'll now be able to trace the back more easily, and I've unpicked one side of the ruching so I can open that up, get the dimensions and leave the other side gathered and keep the measurements from there. That'll help me take the measurements for the lining too. The draped bust piece is really interesting, so I made sure to mark the top edge, added notches to help me match up how the seams came back together to create the drape, used different colours, so green to green, to help me keep track, and I spent a full day tracing everything off. In my big Abercan sale shopping video, I showed off this remnant of swimsuit fabric with colourful coral print in oranges and blues. I got a huge piece for about £6. I then picked up some rubber elastic in an 8mm width. I chose a firm power mesh as lining because that would give me extra stomach support. Then I salvaged the bust cups, rings and sliders from the existing swimsuit. It helps to have a backup, so I also dug out a pattern to use as a possibility in case my tracing didn't work properly. This McCall's pattern is actually a bodysuit, but it has those long side seams that I thought I could insert a gathered stomach panel into if needed. Make sure to pick up one of those books I mentioned, but essentially you lay each pattern piece out as flat as possible, trace the seam lines or edges if you've unpicked, and then create a half pattern. Smooth out all the lines using a ruler or French curve. Add all your notches and labels to make sure you don't mix any pattern pieces up. It's important not to forget the seam allowances. You're tracing the seam line, so you have to add the seam allowance on. That's such an important part. Mine are a narrow 8mm, same as my elastic. I have a lot of spare paper. You can also buy packs of tracing paper from people like Burda that come in A0 sizing. The tracing went pretty well, and once I'd added the missing seam allowances, checked all my seam lengths, added notches and labelled all the pieces, I was ready to start. Every piece of the swimsuit is lined, so you're cutting a piece in outer fabric and then a corresponding piece in lining fabric, and these are all mounted together and then basted in place. I cut everything out with a rotary cutter and pattern weights, which is perfect for slinky knits like swimsuit fabric and swimsuit lining. I basted the back and back lining together all around the edges. Then I sewed the back to the side front pieces. I will say that the twist front bodice hurt my brain. Even those colour-coded notches couldn't help me the first couple of times I tried to assemble it. But I got there, I made the twist piece, and I'm pretty darn pleased with it. That was then gathered and attached to the shelf bra support piece. Then I joined the twist bodice to the top of the front bodice. To create the crotch seam, I sandwiched the back between the front and front lining to enclose the seam allowance in the middle, pressed everything forward, then I basted the front and lining together at the leg openings. The front lining is drafted shorter than the outer because of that ruched stomach panel, and I'd marked gathering notches to help me line everything up. I gathered each front side section until it matched the lining, and that created the tummy control panel, and then I secured the lining under the shelf bra elastic on the inside. The first bit of cover stitching was needed before I could move ahead. I had to stitch along that upper edge to secure the twist front seam allowance to the shelf bra. Alice has the Janome Cover Pro 2000 CPX. That's a 4-thread cover stitch, which can accommodate up to 3 needles. It's basically, you can have 3 needles or you can reduce that down to 2, which I did for my stitching on this swimsuit. It's one of the lower price cover stitches on the market, pretty easy to thread, has a variety of stitches, and it gets, generally good praise across the board. I got on okay with it. This is the only cover stitch machine I've ever tried using, so I can't compare it to anything else. But here's how I got on. After reading the instructions for a bit, I decided on a 2 needle stitch with a narrow stitch distance. I started threading it all up, and setting up the machine was actually quite easy until I got to the last looper. The needles were straightforward to thread, but then I couldn't understand where the looper thread, how to get it through the tension groove at the bottom of the machine, so I had to stop and watch a video tutorial. Then after I'd finished threading it through everything, I couldn't figure out what to do with the loose thread, so I had to watch another video tutorial. Oddly, you just leave it hanging loose rather than pulling it alongside your other threads like you would on an overlocker. The first thing I did was test out some fabric scraps, first with just fabric and lining layers, and then with elastic in the seam too. It was beautiful and I got super excited to get started. Then the shelf bra shifted during the first attempt at sewing the layers together, so I had to undo all my stitches and have another go. Because a cover stitch makes a chain stitch, it comes apart really easily if you just simply tug on the threads. That means you have to be very careful that you don't accidentally undo everything as you pull it away from the machines, or if you accidentally catch the threads before you can secure them. There's no back stitching or lock stitch available. So you either have to tie off the ends or overstitch your stitching if you're sewing in a closed loop, like a swimsuit leg opening or the sleeve on a top. It definitely didn't look as good as my practice stitching, but done is better than perfect. What irritated me was not having a marking to follow on the plate because it's such a narrow stitch amount, but I tried my best to keep the stitching an even distance. I was only sewing a few millimeters away from the edge of the fabric, but I couldn't even use the edge of the foot as a guide because that was too far away. I had to judge it all by eye. After the upper edge was in place, I could create the front and side seams. I decided to machine sew the seams, then serge or overlock the raw edges together. I used a lightning bolt stitch on my machine rather than a zigzag, as I find this looks nicer and doesn't show from the right hand side as much. What I liked about the original suit was the elastic in the front vertical seam alongside the ruching. After the front and side front seam was sewn on the machine, I positioned the elastic underneath the seam allowance and then serged to hold it in place. Then I cover stitched down the length from the ends of the straps all the way to the leg opening to secure the elastic and the seam in place. My strap extensions are adjustable, and I realised right as I was about to construct them that they weren't 8mm wide as I assumed. I didn't check during the tracing, they were actually 1 centimetre wide on the original swimsuit, and therefore I needed 1 centimetre elastic inside. I raced out to my local sewing shop, Boys, hoping they would have something water resistant, and thank goodness they had transparent 10mm elastic in stock. This isn't an ideal choice for swimsuiting, but given it was only on the adjustable strap piece, a very small amount needed, I figured I could risk it. I nearly got distracted by fabric shopping, but raced home to finish the job at hand. The extensions were sewn, fed through the sliders and hand sewn in place. Then I added them onto the ends of the main straps. This was incredibly thick and fiddly. If I was doing this again, I wouldn't make them a separate piece. I would make them extend off the main straps. The last swimsuits I made didn't have this feature, so I'm not adding it again. Each side of the strap has swim elastic serged into the wrong side of the seam allowance, and then that wraps around and sandwiches the extension piece before being cover stitched in place. Both straps have to be pinned in place before you can cover stitch down one strap, around the armhole, across the back, and around the other armhole and strap. By this point, I was pretty sick of the cover stitch because it would sew brilliantly for long stretches, but then as soon as I needed to stop the machine and adjust my work before starting sewing again, it would skip stitches. This seems to be a pretty common issue when I looked on the forums, but there's no real solution because it's impossible to sew without stopping at some point. I tried tinkering with a few settings, but just couldn't get it to consistently keep stitching. To finish, I serged elastic into the leg openings, folded over, and then cover stitched them in place. The cover stitch has a little removable section to help when doing stitches and closed loops, so I popped that out. Working around an opening was great. You didn't really need to stop the cover stitch, so it breezed through with barely any skip stitches. We were falling in love again. Here's the finished swimsuit in action. I'm really pleased with it overall. There's obviously a few bits of wonky cover stitching, and it ended up with a slightly loose bust. I think from unpicking it from another swimsuit and then putting it back in, it's slightly stretched. But overall, it's still a really great fit and it looks lovely. I actually had enough fabric left over to make a high-waisted corally bikini from Tilly and the Buttons too. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this peek at my swimwear sewing adventures. And let's say I'm not going to get myself a cover stitch machine. I might borrow Alice's again if I recover from this experience. Thanks for watching, everyone.